Hello, I am noted spelunky sicko Brendan Bigley, and this is a review of UFO 50. I should say at the top that this is not a review I was planning on making. I've been working on a different review for 3 weeks at this point. It'll see the light of day eventually, but every once in a while, a game comes out, a game that you're already excited about comes out and exceeds your expectations so wildly that, like being engulfed in flames, you need to stop, drop, and roll. You know, you need to just stop everything you're doing and just say, this thing rocks. Okay, so here's the pitch. UFO 50 is 50 games and one game. It is 50 distinct experiences and also one overarching metatextual narrative. The game is being published by Mossmouth and has been developed over the past 8+ years by 6 all-timer developers whose work you've definitely experienced in some way, shape, or form, like Spelunky or Downwell. And if you haven't played either of those games, you should go play both of those games. In fiction, UFO 50 is a collection of lost and now found games by a defunct video game development studio called UFO Soft, who from the years 1982 to 1989 developed 50 games for a system that doesn't exist called the LX. The LX is basically an alternate history version of the Nintendo Entertainment System. It's just a little bit more powerful, but it still can't display more than 32 colors, for example. It's worth noting that these are not micro games. These are complete games, you know, and you could get in the weeds about what Mossmouth means by full games. You could get in the weeds about what I mean by full games. I'm not going to do that because I have a lot of review to get through, but hopefully you'll understand what I mean by the end of it. That said, these games run the gamut genre-wise because there are obviously platformers, just like in real life, the 80s were dominated by a lot of companies wanting to make a Mario. But then there's, racing games. There are multiple golf games. There are puzzle games. There are Metroidvanias. There are strategy games. There are deck builders. There's everything you can possibly imagine. It's a lot of game, and I've played all of them, and I feel pretty confident in saying that UFO 50 is a masterpiece. In the mid-90s, my dad installed a Nintendo Entertainment System emulator on our Gateway computer. This was the era of the computer room, which meant that the Gateway was on a table that was 5 feet from the cat's litter box and tucked away in the basement. I had never experienced emulation before. I'd never even experienced games that weren't for the Sega Genesis before. My dad got a Sega Genesis when I was a baby, I think just to play Sonic the Hedgehog and Madden, because I guess anything will help when you have a screaming baby in your lap. And I pretty much only played Sonic the Hedgehog and whatever else I could find in the bargain bin at Funkoland on Route 17. It's for you New Jersey sickos like me. And when he installed that emulator, that was also my first experience playing Nintendo games in the comfort of my own home. And I didn't know what most of them were. I'd heard of Mario, but I'd not played Mario. I just had this big, huge list of games with no instruction manuals, no boxes, no nothing to go on except for just what the titles were. And Google wasn't really useful enough at this point in the 90s to be considered an actual tool. At least I didn't know how to use it well as a single-digit aged kid. But playing through all of those games is how I fell in love with the original Castlevania and Super Mario Bros. 3. And it's the first time I formed an opinion about the version of Super Mario Bros. 2 that we got instead of, the Lost Levels, which is better in every way. And this is also, unfortunately, how I learned I didn't love a lot of the games on the NES. Even compared to the Sega Genesis, a lot of that stuff felt old and slow and obscure and weird and kind of imparsible by my brain. But I kept poking at that list anyway because I didn't have very many Sega Genesis games. And suddenly I had this big, huge list of games. The amount of games that I had access to, I don't know, multiplied by 20 suddenly overnight. And it was basically like going to that Funkoland and having a big digital free version of the bargain bin. And even if most of the stuff didn't connect with me, maybe there was a Comic Zone in there. Maybe there was a Vector Man 2.
New Vector Man 2, only on Sega Genesis.
To play UFO 50 is to ask, what if every single game in that Funko Land bargain bin was a banger? To play UFO 50 is to ask, what would happen if your dad installed an emulator filled with games you'd never played before? And most of them were great. And I say most because not every game is going to connect with you, and not every game connected with me. And there are 50 games, so chances are a couple of them are going to connect in some way, shape, or form. I considered going into UFO 50 the same way that I consider every Nintendo Direct that I watch. There are some people who go into a Nintendo Direct and they, just sit there and they watch the whole presentation, and then they decide at the end if it was great or if it was mid or whatever, because, I don't know, they spent 10 minutes on a game for children instead of unveiling a new Star Fox or something. Personally, I go into a Nintendo Direct hoping that I walk away from one or two games that I'm excited about. If I go into a Nintendo Direct and they announce a new Splatoon, but they don't announce a new Zelda, that's still an exciting Nintendo Direct to me, just to use a Direct from February of 2021 as an example. Similarly, I went into playing UFO 50 with the same attitude. If I walked out with a game or two that I liked, any other game on top of that is just gravy, really. It was a lot like sifting through that NES emulator. If I come across a Super Mario Bros. 3 or a Castlevania, then the whole experience is worth it immediately. If I brought up my save file right now, and maybe I'll put it up on the screen, you'd see that I have over half the games marked as favorites. 29 out of 50, at least at the time of this recording. And if I evolve into an even more depraved UFO 50 sicko like I'm expecting to, I would guess that I'll probably end up liking the other ones too. When you boot up UFO 50 for the first time, you're presented with a big list of digital game cartridges that are covered in dust and cobwebs. Actually, before you get to that screen, should note this, before you get to that screen, there's an incredible credits screen that shows up, and it's the only time you see the 6 people who actually made this game in real life. Derek Yu and the gang. There's a great picture of Derek finding UFO 50 and the entire UFO Soft garage. Just all of the stuff was boxed up in storage, and underneath is playing the best drum and bass song, and it just feels like this great little homage to pirated software and cracked software from I don't know, the mid 90s and early 2000s. It rocks. It's such a good screen. But then after that, dusty cartridges. So you're presented with all 50 games immediately. They're sorted chronologically from 1982 to 1989, and there's no need to unlock them, so you can just kind of bounce around them of your own volition, follow your own whims. It's kind of like that NES emulator where you can just, if you want to, go off title alone. Thankfully, each game has a little pop-up that shows you the marketing text, Save the Planet from Aliens, and then also a little historical blurb that tells you a little bit about the development of that game from the perspective of somebody at UFO Soft. Now, although you can start with any game, I really, really recommend starting with the very first game, sorted chronologically. It's called Barbuta. Now, Barbuta makes one hell of a first impression. It's listed as an adventure platformer where you must, quote, explore the castle and watch out for traps. The fictional info pane describes it as having been developed in secret on company time, and it apparently almost got someone named Thorson Peter fired. There are only 2 controls listed, just jump and attack, and there's no other information provided to the player. You're immediately thrust into a real NES-ass scene. Taking one step to the right triggers a switch that drops a piece of the ceiling on your head, killing you instantly. It's because you didn't heed the warning to watch out for traps. See, they said, it's the one thing they said, watch out for traps, and you didn't do that. So now you're dead. Suddenly an egg appears on screen, and then you hatch from that egg, and then you keep going. So you learn a bunch of things simultaneously. You learn that one hit and you're dead. You learn that the eggs on the side of the screen represent your lives. You had 6 of them, now you have 5. And you learn that you're going to need to be extremely careful if you want to make it through the rest of the game. Now, Barbuta is absolutely not for everyone, but it also captivates some people. I've talked to a couple people online, some other UFO 50 fans, who started with Barbuta and could not stop until they had finished Barbuta. You know, they were like, I'm going to bust out some graph paper and I'm going to map this entire place. I'm going to understand the ins and outs of the castle. And they just ignored the other 49 games in UFO 50 until they were done with that thing. How incredible it must be to have a mind that works that way. Mine is not one of them, I can tell you that much. And for a lot of people, the secrets of Barbuta can be all-consuming, but for me, I was learning an equally important lesson, just like that trap that triggered right at the beginning of the game. What I was learning from my experience with Barbuta was, if I don't like a game pretty immediately, I can just move on to the next one and see if that one grabs me instead. So that's what I did. See, I had wandered aimlessly throughout the castle in Barbuta for like 15 or so minutes, and I just didn't get anywhere. I didn't make any progress. I didn't learn anything. I died a bunch of times. You know, I found a couple enemies. I found like an item. I found a shop, but none of that really felt like progression. I didn't really understand what I was doing. So I was like, I need to put this down. I need to move on. So I jumped into the next game, which was 1983's Bug Hunter, which is the first game by LX Systems. It's the company that goes on to become UFO Soft. See, it turns out I didn't really need to wait super long to find a game that would click, because Bug Hunter got me immediately. I was hooked on Bug Hunter, man. It's a turn-based roguelike game, so I mean, they got me. Hook, line, and sinker. Each round, you're presented with a list of actions and a grid of bugs that you have to hunt. Hence the name. By picking up these little yellow energy cubes around the grid, you can purchase or swap out your actions with new actions. You can replace run with sprint, or you can replace blast with snipe. You can shift the terrain in a bunch of ways. And in each round, when you've used up all of your actions and you can't purchase any more, if there are any bugs remaining, they'll evolve into stronger and more troublesome versions of themselves. And if they reach the end of their evolutionary line, game over. So while I spent about 15 minutes in Barbuta wandering aimlessly and feeling like I wasn't really progressing or doing anything or learning anything new, Bug Hunter I played for like 45 minutes. And then I just realized I needed to pull myself away to move on to the next one. Not because Bug Hunter had worn out its welcome, but because I wanted to play all 50. I wanted to see what if there was something even better than Bug Hunter. Now, I'm not going to talk about every game in the catalog in this review. I think that the process of finding a lot of these games yourself is important. I think the ones that connect with you and the ones that don't should come from your own experience and not from a review like this. But I gotta say, the third game also really, really got its hooks into me. 1983's Ninpek is a 1 or 2 player adventure platforming game. It's like an arcade score chase game that is noted as, quote, the first implementation of scrolling on the LX. I am terrible at Ninpek. Just horrible. Of the first 3 games in the lineup, Ninpek is the one that feels the most like a game that was actually made and released in the 80s. It feels a lot like a lot of those platformers that I played in that NES emulator way back when that were just crushingly difficult for no kind of reason. It has controls that feel just a bit more stiff than you'd hope. It has some opaque mechanics. Like, I don't know still what the flashing shurikens do. They don't seem to give me points. I don't think they upgrade my attack at all. Maybe they do. Maybe you know. I don't know. But I can't figure it out, and I've played that game a lot. I've played Ninpek a lot. I can't stop playing Ninpek. Even when I went to go capture footage of Ninpek for this video, and this is true, when I went to go play it, I was like, I probably need 5, maybe 10 minutes of Ninpek total, and I ended up playing it for like another 30 minutes because every single time I died in like a really stupid way, I just told myself like, I just need to get a little further. I just need to see a little more. I still haven't beaten Ninpek. Again, I'm terrible at it, but it's one of those games that I feel like if I just put more time in, I will get better at, and maybe I can finish eventually. But there are a few things that are important to point out about Ninpek, you know, beyond just my horrible need to place higher on a leaderboard. For example, the game's got one-hit deaths. And just like Barbuta, guess what? Thorson Peter worked on this one too. And it may seem like a small thing, but it's an important one because as soon as you recognize something like this, you start to sense the connective tissue between all 50 games in UFO 50. Take, for example, 1984's Mortal. It's a game in which you have a small army, you have to fight back against some invading monsters, and the way you fight back is by having your individual army members sacrifice themselves. They can turn themselves into stone, they can turn into an arrow that darts forwards, They can explode into little tiny bits, and each soldier's death hypothetically should be used for the greater good. At least that's what the game presents. Each sacrifice should bring you another step closer towards the goal. The conceit of the game is absolutely terrifying. I hate watching the little guys dart across the screen and embed their heads into the hard rock wall. It really freaks me out. In a way, I find it very unsettling, which I think is impressive considering what this game looks like graphically. But it evolves into something really, really compelling because there's this puzzle platforming element here, and the puzzle side of it is just as difficult as the platforming at times. When you don't understand what enemies do, they can kill you very quickly. But also, if you run out of guys in your army, you're out of luck. You got to start the level from the beginning again. There are shades of Ninpek and Barbuta in here, which is really interesting because when you think about a person who has stumbled into this almost auteur design choice of having players die in one hit, you can understand where they would eventually come up with an idea to mess with that or twist it a little bit into a game like Mortal. And it's worth mentioning that there are full-on sequels in this game as well, so while you can trace the lineage from a thing like Barbuta to Ninpek to Mortal, you can also trace a much deeper, more obvious line between Mortal and 1987's Mortal 2. It's a game where you're still sacrificing your army one soldier at a time, but the high-level ask shifts from individual puzzle platforming levels to something closer to a Metroidvania. You have 99 lives total, and it's not easy. I'll tell you that much. It's a difficult video game, but it also includes new transformations and classes, new enemies, and it leads to a game that feels bigger and better in the exact way that game critics loved in the 80s. You know, when the game's sequel is just a bigger, better version of the original with like one new interesting idea, that makes it a quote-unquote better sequel to some people. And the experience of playing Mortal and then going into Mortal 2 is really rewarding because it starts to illuminate a bunch of, again, connective tissue between all of these games. Now, outside of Wavelengths, I also co-host a weekly podcast called Into the Aether. We say at the top of every episode that it's, quote, a low-key video game podcast, despite occasionally releasing episodes that are 16 hours long that encompass every great game from the years 2000 to 2009. It's low-key in concept, rarely in execution. Every year, we start our seasons with a retrospective look at an entire console's library. We'll pick a console and we'll play every great game from that console over the course of a year, and then sit down and record one big episode all about it. And that episode is usually huge, but it is a really rewarding process. We started in 2021 with the Game Boy Advance, and the prep was done in secret as we played 80 plus games across the entire console's lifecycle. In 2022, we played over 120 games for the Nintendo DS, and then in that same year, we played another 70 games for the Nintendo 3DS for an episode for our Patreon subscribers. In 2023, we played about 100 games for the Sega Dreamcast, and then this most recent episode, we played about 150 games for the Nintendo GameCube. This process obviously takes an extremely long time. Playing every single game enough that you can speak to it and you can rank it at the end of the day is a process that is extremely daunting. I spend the better part of a year living and breathing a console's library, and when I'm done with that, I feel like I've won the Coney Island hot dog eating contest, which, I'm a winner. Technically, I'm a winner, but at what cost? You may ask, and I ask myself, at what cost? Winning in this case means that I've learned a ton about that time period. I've learned what made that console interesting. I've learned what games resonated with me as a kid and which ones resonate with me now. And in some ways, I learn more about what I love about video games as a medium. The Game Boy Advance was pitched to many as what if you could take the Super Nintendo on the go. But through the collective genius of a bunch of development teams, we watched that thing grow into its own beast. It became the home of one of the best Zelda games. It introduced us to WarioWare. It introduced a genre-defining sports RPG in Mario Golf Advance Tour. We got the best Castlevania since the original, and I know people like Symphony of the Night a lot. I don't know. I think Aria of Sorrow is better. If you disagree with me, that's what the comment section's for, baby. And one of the best turn-based RPGs ever made in Mother 3. Mother 3 is really good. It's hard to overstate how good Mother 3 is. If you haven't played Mother 3, you should do that. I think you should do that. And now, when we think about the Game Boy Advance, we consider those characteristics that made it really stand out, right? Like, even though it's a console, even though it's a handheld that just had a D-pad and A and B buttons and shoulder buttons, we think about the vibrant color schemes and the ways in which characters move through space and some of the weirder swings on that thing. It all feels like the genetic makeup of the Game Boy Advance, the GBA DNA, if you will. And I could say the same of the way developers made use of the weird hardware of the Nintendo DS, or those like early 3D vibrant blue skyboxes in like every Sega Dreamcast game. It's rewarding to revisit the games that shaped us, but it's equally rewarding to fill in the blanks, to take chances on the stuff that you wanted to play as a kid but you couldn't, like iNinja. I really wanted to play iNinja as a kid, but I didn't. And now I have played it, and it's fine. But a good chunk of the fun of those console retrospective experiences is making my way through a big list of games, some of which I've heard of, some of which I've played before, but a lot of which I haven't, and finding those ones that really, really stand up on the shoulders of everybody else and say, like, hello, I rock. Like Cannon Spike for the Sega Dreamcast. I'd never heard of that game. I play that game all the time still. At the end of the day, engaging with more art just introduces you to more interesting ideas. It's why I like doing Into the Aether every week. It's why these yearly console retrospectives are worth doing, even though they're very challenging at times. They allow me to start thinking differently about the games that I loved as a kid, even small realizations, like Metroid Zero Mission was my favorite Metroid for a long time, but now that I'm revisiting the entire Game Boy Advance library, it turns out Metroid Fusion is the one that really stands out to me in 2024. Having that small realization leads to questions like, why? And I think staying curious about yourself and your taste and the world around you is one of the most important things a person can do. And to be clear, I don't mean like flat earth curious. There's a line, and it wraps all the way around the globe, baby. UFO 50 is the gamification of our yearly console retrospective experience. Even for the purposes of this review, playing all 50 games felt like activating those same exact parts of my brain. Like, you can start to tell pretty quickly which games are for you. Thankfully, UFO 50 has a little built-in way of favoriting games, so you can filter them later. I played every game for a while in chronological order. I favorited the ones that seemed like they were either instant hits or, like Barbuta, required more time to fully wrap my head around. Once I dusted off the last cart, the process of digging back in for round 2 started. I started with the games that I knew that I loved already. I completed the odd game here or there, like 1985's Camouflage, in which a gecko is chastised by the gods of sun and rain and told they're not living up to their scaly potential, and only by enduring hardship can they achieve their destiny. It's an incredible setup for what is just kind of like a puzzle stealth game, where you just need to go from point A to point B and not get eaten by frogs and birds and alligators and stuff. But it's the first game I finished because I couldn't put it down. And once I was done with all the ones I knew I liked already, I jumped into the ones that I kind of had a harder time with. I wanted to see if any bubbled up to the top or, became more interesting to me on a second go around. One that stood out was Mooncat. It's a game with the least intuitive controls I have ever experienced and is listed as a spiritual successor to Barbuta, which, if I'm being honest, is why I didn't want to play it the first time around. And sorry in advance, but I'm going to spoil something about Mooncat real quick. But do I think that it has good controls now? No, I don't. But after a little adjustment period and starting to realize that the D-pad moves your character left and the face buttons move your character to the right, not left and right with the left and right on D-pad, Mooncat really really clicked for me. I mean, like it requires rewiring your brain a little bit, but it really worked for me. And in some ways, you can kind of see how an alternate history version of the 80s, a designer like Thorsten Peter would go back to the drawing board with Barbuta and make a game like Mooncat and try out a completely wild control scheme, because this was the era where game design was new. People didn't know what was like the definitive right choice when it came to controlling characters. There's a world in which Thorsten Peter was right, and the left side of your controller should move your character left and the right side of your controller should move your character right. Go back and play any first-person shooter on the PS2 or the GameCube, and you will see in a pre-Halo world what people thought was the right choice for how first-person shooters should work on consoles. There's a world in which, in the early 80s, Thorsten Peter was right about his weird Mooncat controls. And by continuing to experience games like Mooncat and experiencing ideas like the ones in Mooncat and where they came from games like Barbuta, you can start to understand or get a better picture of the LX as this fictional system. You can imagine a world in which the pseudo 3D of 1989's Campella 3 would go on to amaze players. And you can also imagine how 1987's Fist Hell would shock the world and definitely parents by being the first UFO soft game that had blood in it. And actually, a quick note about Fist Hell. That one's really interesting to me in particular as the first game that has blood in it, because it's about a bunch of kids who are untrusting of their mayor and their city, and they need to fight a bunch of zombies to try and get a better person elected mayor. And you can almost feel on the other end of the screen the developers of the game in the 80s being, unsatisfied or dissatisfied with their government and their local government leadership. So they made a whole ass beat 'em up game to get that feeling out. That's the kind of thing that UFO 50 makes you think about while you're playing these games, is okay, this is a cool, fun little beat 'em up game, but I'm also kind of learning about the people who made it in a way. And that's the meta narrative here. That's the good stuff, man. Anyway, now that I'm done with that whole experience, I feel very confident in telling you exactly what order you should play UFO 50 in. You should start with Barbuta, 1982's Barbuta. You need to have that experience that everybody else had. You need to sit back and be like, that is a bold choice. I can't believe that that's the first game they put in this thing, because it's the only game that makes sense to be the first one in that thing. And when you've had your time with Barbuta, maybe you're one of those people who gets super invested in it. Maybe you're not. You need to move on to Pilot Quest, Return to Zoldath. Pilot Quest is incredibly an idle game in which one of UFO Soft's mascots, named Pilot, collects gems to find a way to repair their crashed ship and fly back into space. The little blurb about the game says that it makes use of the LX's oft-ignored real-time clock, which means that if you plant enough seeds, like if you go talk to the tree and give him some moon crystals, he'll give you a seed, and you can plant that seed, and that seed will grow into a plant, and that plant will produce moon crystals even when you're not playing Pilot Quest. You need to be playing UFO 50, you need to be in the collection, but in the background, while you're playing all 49 other video games, Pilot Quest is still generating moon crystals for you. After that, you play every game in chronological order. The process of playing every game in chronological order allows you to see these threads of concepts, explorations, and ideas all the way through UFO Soft's final game in 1989. For example, the risk-reward of 1983's Bug Hunter has direct lineage that leads to 1984's Tactics and 1985's Avianos, leading to the development of 1986's Party House, which is a game that I swear to God, if it was released by itself, would have been in my top 5 for Game of the Year this year. Party House is a deck-building roguelike in which you have to throw a party so incredible that aliens come down from space to visit, or mermaids and unicorns make their presence known, because how on this very round Earth would anyone miss this party? You have 25 nights to throw parties that bring in enough money and garner enough popularity to make the impossible possible. And each round is spent deciding if you should try and pack one more person into your cramped house, because that guess could be the difference between enough money for an upgrade to upgrade the house itself, but also that one person could make the cops show up because the party got too loud, and then the whole thing gets busted and you don't get anything and you lose a night. In between each party, you're able to spend all your resources on adding more friends to your Rolodex or upgrading your house, and each friend comes with some kind of attribute, positive or negative. The gangster, for example, nets you $4 if he shows up to your party, but increases the likelihood that the party gets shut down by the cops. But the cute dog calms everyone down and gives you +2 popularity. He's a very good boy. It's a good video game, and it's inspired by all of the games that came before it, and you can see how it inspires the games that come after it. But this is what you sign up for when you're playing UFO 50. You can bounce between all these games and enjoy them on their own individual terms, and occasionally have a moment where you say, whoops, I played this one for an hour and a half like I did many times. And then you stand back and you admire the connective tissue between them, and you wonder about the developers that made each game and what these games say about them as people. And then you stand back even further and you remember that none of the developers of these games exist in the first place. UFOsoft doesn't exist, and that this entire project is one of the most ambitious and incredible feats by a small indie team in recent memory. To zoom out all the way, you're left with a 6-person team who spent about an entire decade building a game that's supposed to imbue us with a nostalgia for a time that didn't really exist, all while being an homage to a time that really did exist. On top of that, it's also a meditation on what can happen when a single team is able to build upon their own works long enough to see their ideas mature completely. I've said this in a past video, but I love the end of a console's life cycle. I love when developers have gotten to a point where they feel comfortable enough with a piece of hardware that they can push it to its absolute limits, like Shadow of the Colossus on the PS2, or every game coming out for the Nintendo Switch this year in 2024. In both the fiction and in the reality of UFO 50, we have a team of people who, for the better part of a decade, were able to keep making games together. And they were able to build off of each other's strengths and weaknesses and build a catalog of big swings that deserve to be played and loved individually. And despite being set in an alternate version of the 1980s, these are games made by modern rock stars of indie game development. There are ideas bleeding backwards through time here, where a game like Party House stands on its own and definitely would have been a hit in the 80s. You can feel the influence of games like Slay the Spire or Balatro in that thing. It's also got a little like Super Auto Pets in there. I like Super Auto Pets. That's another good game. I'm looking forward to the in-person Bushido Ball tournaments that are definitely going to start happening at PAX and other events like it, in the same vein of games like Towerfall, when there were Towerfall tournaments happening all over the place. I'm excited to see communities pop up online, like they already have, to try and band together and solve a lot of the secrets in this game, like what's going on with the mysterious terminal menu. There are some answers to that floating around, and I'm not going to spoil them here. But most of all, I'm just excited to play more UFO 50, which I know sounds silly, but it's already one of the best games I played this year by virtue of being many of the best games I've played this year. And I think it's just going to take a long time to sink in. There are a lot of games in here, and I want to beat most of them, I think. There are a great many more games to complete. There are gold cartridges and cherry red cartridges, and there are secrets to find, and there are gifts to unlock in the garden menu, which I haven't even talked about at all, but I absolutely love because it kind of reminds me of We Love Katamari. But also there's the overarching narrative about what's going on with these developers at UFOsoft. I'm excited to learn more about them, maybe. I feel like there are some real buried hints in this thing that are going to illuminate some more stuff about that, and I just can't really wrap my head around how big of a project this is. You know, it took them about a decade to put together, and it is unbelievably ambitious because it's not just 50 great games, but it's 50 great games that tell a cohesive story about a time and about a people, and I think that's really special, and that's something we don't get very often. UFO 50 is out now on PC. It's $25. Runs great on Steam Deck. If you have Mac, you can use Whiskey to play it. Go to getwhiskey.app, I think, if you want to play it on Mac. And it's coming to consoles eventually, according to its developers. You should go play it. It's very special. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't. I'll catch you later.